My son called me a failure in front of 30 people. His wife laughed into her wine glass. My ex-wife said, "He only said what everyone else was afraid to tell you." Her new husband raised his bourbon toward me like he was celebrating a victory. I didn't shout. I didn't defend myself. I folded my napkin, thanked the waiter, and walked out. They thought my silence meant I had been defeated. What they didn't know was that every symbol of my son's success rested on something I had quietly built. By Monday morning, the first one would be gone. My name is Samuel Whitaker. I was 69 years old that night. Although my son had recently started speaking about me as if I were already halfway inside a grave, most people called me Sam. I had spent 40 years building cabinets, kitchens, staircases, restaurant counters, church pews, and anything else that could be made from wood and measured honestly. I was never famous. I never appeared on magazine covers. Nobody followed me into restaurants hoping for photographs. But 27 families received paychecks from the business I started in a rented garage with $600, 3 borrowed tools, and more confidence than experience. That mattered to me. It no longer seemed to matter to my son. The dinner was supposed to celebrate the 5th anniversary of Hearth and Grain Renovations, the modern remodeling brand my son Mason had built around my old company. The restaurant was called Ember and Oak, a polished place in downtown Louisville, where the servers described steak temperatures with the seriousness of surgeons. Exposed brick covered the walls. Amber lights hung above the tables. Every plate looked arranged for a photograph. Brooke Mason's wife had selected the restaurant because it had the right visual identity. Those were her words. She had also selected my seat. It was near the far end of the long table close to the kitchen doors, and 2 chairs away from the youngest employee in the company. Mason sat in the center. Beside him were Brooke, my ex-wife, Elaine, and Elaine's husband, Grant Holloway. That arrangement told the entire story before anyone said a word. I wore a navy blazer I had owned for 12 years. The sleeves still fit. The shoulders were clean. The buttons were all present. Brooke looked me over as I sat down. "You should have let us take you shopping," she said. "The company photographer is here. I came for dinner." "Yes, but these pictures will represent the brand." I glanced at Mason. He was adjusting the silver cufflinks Brooke had bought him for his birthday. "They're fine, Brooke," he said without looking at me. "Dad doesn't care about that stuff. Dad doesn't care about that stuff." It was the sentence Mason used whenever he wanted to make my absence from his life sound voluntary. Dad doesn't care about social media. Dad doesn't care about design. Dad doesn't care about networking. Dad doesn't care about growth. The truth was simpler. I cared about people finishing jobs correctly. I cared about the installer whose child was sick. I cared about whether a customer's cabinets would still close properly after 10 humid Kentucky summers. I cared about payroll being ready on Friday. Mason cared about the photograph taken after the work was done. Grant Holloway arrived 10 minutes late so everyone could see him enter. He wore a fitted gray jacket, a gold watch, and the expression of a man who believed the room had been waiting for him. He kissed Elaine's cheek, clapped Mason on the shoulder, and gave me a brief nod. "Still wearing the classics, Sam." I looked down at my blazer. It hasn't offended me yet. A few employees laughed. Grant smiled, but his eyes did not. Grant had been married to Elaine for 6 years. During that time, he had called himself a development consultant, a strategic advisor, a brand architect, and for approximately 4 months, a leadership futurist. I had never understood the last one. What I did understand was that Hearth and Grain paid him $11,500 every month. In exchange, he attended occasional meetings, spoke for long periods, and left before anyone could ask him to do actual work. Mason worshipped him. Grant was everything I was not. Loud, polished, certain. He never hesitated before answering a question, even when he did not know the answer. To my son, certainty looked like wisdom. To me, it often looked like a man trying to outrun the truth. The dinner began with cocktails and a slideshow Brooke had assembled. Photographs appeared on a screen near the bar. Mason shaking hands with clients. Mason standing inside renovated kitchens. Mason holding oversized ceremonial scissors at the showroom opening. Mason and Grant at a lake resort beneath the words, "The minds behind the movement." There was one photograph of me. I was in the background carrying 2 sample cabinet doors. The image remained on the screen for less than 3 seconds. Nobody mentioned it. Across the table, Luis Mendoza noticed. Luis had worked beside me for 26 years. He had taught Mason how to read a measuring tape when Mason was 9. He had once driven through a snowstorm to help me finish a restaurant counter because the owner's opening night depended on it. Now Mason called him old school when Luis questioned shortcuts. Luis met my eyes. He did not need to say anything. That was one of the things I valued about him. His silence had never been empty. The slideshow ended with a photograph of Mason standing alone beneath the new hearth and grain sign. The caption read, "5 years, one vision, built from nothing." Applause filled the room. Mason stood and raised his glass. 5 years ago, hearth and grain was just an idea, he said. No investors, no safety net, just belief. My fingers tightened around my water glass. No safety net. The showroom building had been purchased with money from a warehouse property I sold. The first major advertising campaign had been paid from my retirement account. During the slow winter 2 years earlier, I had transferred $180,000 into the company, so nobody missed a paycheck. Mason knew some of that. He had simply learned to remember it differently. We faced people who said our vision was too ambitious, he continued. People who believed we should remain a small woodworking shop. His eyes flicked toward me. Several employees noticed. Brooke smiled. But we proved that bold thinking wins. Grant lifted his glass. To bold thinking, everyone repeated it. I raised mine a few inches. Not because I agreed, because the employees deserved to enjoy their dinner without being trapped inside our family war. The food arrived. Mason spent most of the meal telling stories about future expansion. 2 new showrooms, a line of branded furniture, a partnership with a residential developer in Lexington, a video series featuring Brooke, a leadership podcast with Grant. None of those ideas had been approved. Several were being discussed for the first time at the table. When Luis asked what the expansion would mean for the production crew, Mason barely looked at him. "We'll modernize." Luis waited. "What does that mean?" "It means we can't keep building the future with yesterday's habits. We are already behind on 3 kitchens. That's because the crews need better systems. The crews need 2 more installers." Mason smiled with the patience people use toward children. "Luis, this is exactly the kind of limited thinking Grant has been helping us move beyond." The table quieted. Luis placed his fork down. I started to speak. Then Grant leaned forward. "Mason's right, Sam. Growth makes traditional craftsmen uncomfortable. They confuse caution with wisdom." The sentence was aimed at Luis, but intended for me. I looked at Grant. Sometimes caution is what keeps a building standing, and sometimes it prevents anyone from building higher. Mason nodded. "Exactly." Elaine watched Grant with admiration. There had been a time when she rolled her eyes at men who spoke in slogans. Now she repeated them. After our divorce, she had spent years telling Mason that I had loved the shop more than I loved our family. There was some truth in that accusation. I had missed school events. I had come home exhausted. I had answered customer calls during dinner. When Mason was 11, I promised to attend the final game of his Little League season. A restaurant owner called that afternoon because a water leak had damaged a counter we had installed. I went to the restaurant instead. By the time I reached the baseball field, the lights were off. Mason was sitting in Elaine's car with his uniform still on. He would not look at me. I told myself I had done what was necessary to keep the business alive. Mason heard that I had chosen a countertop over him. That wound never completely healed. Grant discovered it years later and widened it. He told Mason that men like me used sacrifice as an excuse for emotional failure. He told him that providing money did not make someone a father. Again, there was enough truth inside the cruelty to make it powerful. My mistake was trying to repair the past with money. When Mason needed college tuition, I paid it. When he wanted to modernize the company, I funded it. When he married Brooke, I covered the reception. When they wanted a home they could not afford, I gave them one for almost nothing. Every gift was an apology I did not know how to speak. Mason eventually stopped seeing the apology. He saw only the supply. Dessert arrived. A 7-layer chocolate cake was placed before Mason, with a small gold decoration shaped like the number 5. The company photographer moved around the table. Brooke adjusted everyone's positions. Grant moved closer to Mason. Then she noticed me. "Sam, could you lean back a little? You're blocking the logo behind you." I leaned back. The photographer took several pictures. Grant stood to make a final toast. "Mason represents the future of American entrepreneurship," he began. "He understands that success is not created by keeping your head down and hoping people notice your hard work." His eyes turned toward me. "Success requires visibility, courage, the willingness to claim your value." He placed one hand on Mason's shoulder. "I wish I had met this young man earlier. He needed someone to teach him that thinking small is still failure even when it looks responsible." The words struck deeper than they should have. Not because Grant believed them, because Mason did. Mason stood. He had consumed too much wine, but alcohol does not invent contempt. It merely removes the manners hiding it. "Grant taught me more about leadership in 5 years than I learned growing up," Mason said. A few employees stared at their plates. He continued, "My dad is a good craftsman. Nobody is denying that. Good craftsman," as if he had discovered me sweeping floors in the business he created. "But there's a difference between making things and building success." I finally spoke. "Who told you those were different?" Mason laughed. "Dad, don't do this tonight." I asked a question. "You always turn everything into a lesson." Grant leaned toward him. "Let it go." The advice sounded generous. It was actually encouragement. Mason looked from Grant to me. The wine had made his face red. "You want the truth? I would prefer it." "Fine." He pushed his chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the floor. Nearby conversations stopped. Mason pointed toward Grant. "Look at him. He walks into a room and people know he matters." Then he pointed at me. "You walk into a room and people think you came to fix the cabinets." No one laughed. Mason seemed disappointed by that, so he pushed harder. "Grant built a real life. He gave Mom the kind of home she deserved. He knows powerful people. He thinks ahead." He turned fully toward me. "You spent 40 years covered in dust, driving the same old truck, living in the same old house, and telling yourself being careful was noble." Brooke whispered Mason, but she was smiling behind her glass. Elaine looked at me. For 1 second, I thought she might defend me. Instead, she said, "He only said what everyone else was afraid to tell you." The room seemed to shrink. That sentence hurt more than Mason's. Elaine and I had once shared canned soup because we could not afford groceries until payday. She had held Mason while I worked nights. She knew exactly what the business had cost us. She also knew what it had given us. But Grant was watching her, and Mason was watching her. So she chose the version of history that made her new life look like an escape. Mason's voice became louder. "You lost Dad." The photographer lowered his camera. Grant didn't. Grant raised his bourbon glass. A quiet toast. That was when something inside me changed. Not broke. Breaking suggests chaos. This was cleaner. It felt like a lock turning. For years I had believed one more gift might bring my son back. One more loan. One more favor, one more silence. At that table, I finally understood that every rescue had taken him farther away. I folded my napkin, placed it beside the untouched cake, stood. The room waited. Mason looked almost eager for me to shout. Grant wanted an argument he could perform in front of an audience. Elaine expected me to endure the injury so everyone else could finish dessert. I looked at my son. For a second, I saw the 12-year-old boy waiting alone after a baseball game. Then I saw the man who had used that wound as permission to wound me. "Thank you for dinner," I said. Mason blinked. "That's it." "Yes, you're just leaving. I'm finished eating." He laughed. "Don't be dramatic." I nearly answered. A cruel sentence rose into my mouth. Something about Grant's monthly checks. Something that would have stripped him naked in front of the table. I could have said it. Part of me wanted to. Instead, I looked at Mason and said goodnight. Then I walked out. Behind me, Grant said, "He'll cool off." Brooke replied. He always does. The restaurant door closed. The cold air outside entered my lungs like medicine. My truck sat near the edge of the parking lot. A 12-year-old Ford F-150 with a dented rear bumper and enough scratches to tell its own biography. Mason hated that truck. He once asked me not to park it outside the showroom because it made the business look unsuccessful. I climbed inside but did not start the engine. My hands rested on the steering wheel. I expected anger. What I felt was exhaustion. The kind that comes when you finally realize you have been carrying people who resent you for not carrying them more elegantly. My phone buzzed. Elaine, you embarrassed Mason by walking out. Please don't ruin his celebration. Not one word about what he had said. A second message appeared. Brooke, he had too much wine. Don't make this bigger than it was. Then Mason, you always do this. You go quiet so everyone feels guilty. Another message arrived before I put the phone down. Brooke had posted a photograph. Mason, Elaine Grant, and Brooke were smiling beneath the Hearth and Grain logo. My chair was empty at the edge of the image. The caption read, "Winners don't apologize for outgrowing small thinking." I stared at the photograph. The people who had been fed, housed, and protected by my labor were celebrating their escape from me. I turned the phone face down. Then I drove home. My house stood on a quiet street in St. Matthews beneath 2 old maple trees. It was a brick ranch with a deep porch and a detached garage I had converted into a workshop. Elaine had once loved it. Near the end of our marriage, she began calling it ordinary. I called it paid for. Inside, I hung my blazer, turned on one lamp, and went into the kitchen. A faded photograph remained on the refrigerator. Mason at 12 holding a crooked birdhouse. The roof leaned left. One side was shorter than the other. He had built it with me on a Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after the baseball game I missed. I remembered trying to apologize while we worked. He barely spoke. When the birdhouse was finished, I told him it was perfect. He said, "No, it isn't." I answered, "It doesn't have to be perfect to be worth keeping." A family of wrens lived in it for 3 summers. I touched the edge of the photograph. Then I went into my study. The room had once been Mason's bedroom. His old baseball trophy remained in a box inside the closet. On the desk sat the original key to Whitaker Millworks. The business began in 1984. I worked days at a furniture factory and nights in a rented garage. Elaine kept the books at our kitchen table. When Mason was born, we sometimes placed his crib in the office because we could not afford childcare. The company had survived recessions, a fire, and a winter, when the heater failed so often that we wore gloves while sanding. I opened a blue folder, not because I needed paperwork to remind me what belonged to whom, because I needed to see how thoroughly I had confused love with access. The company remained mine. Mason was general manager. His salary, bonuses, vehicle, and housing assistance were benefits I had approved. The black Yukon he drove belonged to the company. The Crescent Hill townhouse where he lived belonged to me. For the first year, he paid $600 a month. Then he stopped. I never asked why. Grant's consulting agreement was renewed annually with my silent approval. Mason had argued that Grant brought executive discipline to the business. What Grant brought was invoices. I closed the folder. Then I called Rosa Delgado. Rosa had managed the books for 21 years. She answered after 4 rings. "Sam, I'm sorry it's late. You don't call late unless something is wrong. I need to take control of the company again." The silence on the line lasted several seconds. Then Rosa exhaled. "Thank God." Her answer surprised me. "What has been happening?" "More than you know. Can you meet tomorrow? 7, Miller's Diner. Bring Luis." I was going to. Before she ended the call, she asked, "Are you all right?" The question nearly undid me. My own family had not asked. "I will be." I slept badly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mason pointing toward Grant. "You lost." Grant didn't. At 3 in the morning, I almost called Mason. The old reflex returned. Explain, repair, absorb. I picked up the phone. Then I saw Brooke's post again. I put it down. At 7, I entered Miller's Diner. The place smelled like coffee, bacon, and syrup. The red vinyl booths had cracks repaired with black tape. A waitress named Cheryl had known me for 20 years. She brought coffee without asking. Rough morning. Started last night. She squeezed my shoulder. Rosa and Luis sat across from me. Neither began with sympathy. That was one reason I trusted them. Rosa opened a notebook. Mason has been using company money as though it were his personal account. How much? Enough to matter. Not enough to destroy us yet. Yet. She listed the obvious expenses. A private club membership, expensive dinners, an executive office renovation, the Lake Resort Leadership Retreat, attended by Mason Brooke Elaine Grant, and 2 of Mason's friends. No employees. Then Luis spoke. He cut the crew bonuses. Why? He said we needed the money for expansion. The company had its strongest sales year. I know. Rosa slid a photograph across the table. It showed Tyler Jennings wearing an orange vest inside a home improvement warehouse. Tyler had worked for us for 8 years. He had 3 children. Mason fired him in January, Rosa said. For what? He questioned a deadline. Said the crew could not complete a kitchen safely in the time promised. My stomach tightened. Why wasn't I told? Mason told everyone you had retired completely. He said contacting you about operations would be disrespectful. Luis looked into his coffee. Tyler lost his health insurance while his youngest daughter was being treated for asthma. The numbers disappeared. The situation became human. What else? Luis hesitated. Then he took out his phone and showed me an email. It had been sent from Mason to the senior staff. Effective, immediately avoid referring to Samuel Whitaker as the founder during client-facing interactions. Hearth and Grain represents a new organization, not a continuation of an outdated local workshop. I read the sentence twice. Not only had my son claimed to build the company from nothing, he had instructed employees to erase me. Luis said, I'm sorry, Sam. I placed the phone down. When was this sent? 6 months ago. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought you knew, Rosa added. There's more. Mason had asked about borrowing against the showroom building. He wanted to open 2 new locations. Grant was encouraging him. The proposed loan would place the original company property at risk. The building was the one asset I had promised never to gamble. 27 families depended on it. That ended the last of my hesitation. This is no longer about what he said at dinner, I told them. Rosa nodded. It never was. What happens if we remove him from operations? The company survives, she said. Luis can manage production. I can control spending. You handle clients until we appoint someone permanent. And the employees, they keep working. Then we begin Monday. Luis looked uneasy. He's going to think I betrayed him. He has been betraying you for years. That doesn't mean I want to become like him. You won't. I leaned forward. I don't want him destroyed. I want the support removed. Rosa closed the notebook. All of it. All of it. The vehicle. Back to the fleet. Spending access. Suspended. Grant. Finished. The townhouse. I paused. That one hurt. Mason had raised his children there in my imagination, even though he and Brooke had none. I had pictured holidays, Sunday dinners, a future family. Give him a real choice, I said. Market rent beginning next month or 30 days to move. Luis studied me. You're sure? Number. It was the truth. I'm not sure of anything except that continuing this way will ruin him and the company. Rosa asked, what happens if he apologizes? I listen and restore everything. Number. Saying the word made my chest ache, but I said it again. Number. After breakfast, I drove to the shop. The building was empty on Saturdays. Sunlight entered through the high windows and revealed dust floating in the air. The smell of oak and machine oil carried me backward. I touched the workbench where Mason had completed school projects. I passed the table saw he had damaged by dropping a paint can on it at 16. Near the loading area was a wall of company photographs. The oldest showed me at 29 beside our first delivery van. Elaine held baby Mason. We looked tired and happy. Farther down was the showroom opening. Mason stood in the center with Brooke and Grant. I stood near the edge. My position had seemed accidental at the time. Now it looked like practice. I entered Mason's office. A television covered one wall. A leather couch sat beneath shelves of unread business books. Behind the glass desk hung a metal sign. Mason Whitaker, founder and creative director. I removed it. The metal was heavier than expected, I placed it face down on the couch. Then I opened a cabinet. Inside was a framed photograph of the first 14 employees. It had once hung in the lobby. Someone had moved it into storage. I carried it downstairs. As I reached the front entrance, I saw a man standing outside. Tyler Jennings. He wore his warehouse uniform. He had come to pick up a toolbox he left months earlier. When he saw me, he stopped. "Mr. Whitaker." "Tyler." I didn't expect anyone here. Neither did I. We stood awkwardly. I opened the door. He collected the toolbox from a shelf near the production floor. Before leaving, he said, "I'm sorry about the company." "What do you mean? It used to be a good place." The sentence entered me like a nail. "Why didn't you call me?" "Mason said you didn't want to be bothered." "That wasn't true." Tyler nodded. "I know that now. How is your daughter?" "Better. Insurance. My wife's job covered some. We still owe the hospital." I almost offered money. The instinct was immediate. Solve. Pay. Make the discomfort disappear. Instead, I asked, "Would you consider returning?" Tyler looked surprised. "Is Mason leaving?" "He's being removed from operations." Tyler looked toward the office upstairs. "I don't know. You don't have to answer now." He picked up the toolbox. "I liked working for Luis. I'll tell him." At the door, he paused. "Mason wasn't always like that." "I know. He used to stay late and help us load." "I know." Tyler left. I stood alone beneath the high windows. The saddest part was not that my son had become cruel. It was that enough of the old Mason remained for people to remember him. Sunday passed quietly. I attended church. The sermon was about forgiveness and access. The pastor said, "You may forgive someone and still refuse to hand them the same weapon." I wrote the sentence on the back of the program. That afternoon, I repaired the crooked birdhouse from the refrigerator photograph. The original had fallen from the maple tree years ago. One side was cracked. I sanded it carefully. My phone rang 5 times. Mason, Elaine, Brooke, Grant, then Mason again. I answered none. Across town, the celebration continued. Rosa sent me a screenshot of Brooke's newest post. She and Mason were sitting on the patio of the townhouse. Boxes containing new outdoor furniture were visible behind them. The caption read, "Protect your energy." Some people only show up to remind you why you outgrew them. The furniture had cost nearly $8,000. They tried charging it to the company. Rosa declined the transaction. Mason called the bank and was told the charge had been rejected internally. He assumed it was an error. Grant advised him not to contact me. "Power follows the person willing to walk away," he said. Grant had built an entire identity from sentences that sounded important until examined. Monday morning arrived with rain. At 7:15, Luis and a fleet driver pulled up outside Mason's townhouse. The black Yukon was parked in the driveway. Mason emerged wearing a tailored raincoat and carrying coffee. "What are you doing here?" Luis held out his hand. "I need the keys." "For what?" "The delivery van is in the shop. We need the Yukon for site work." "I have meetings. You can use your personal car." "I sold my car when I got this." "That was your choice." Mason laughed. "You don't have authority to take my vehicle." Sam reassigned it. The laughter stopped. "My father hasn't run the company in years." "He does now." Brooke appeared in the doorway wearing a robe. "What's happening?" "Dad is throwing a tantrum." Luis corrected him. "Sam is reclaiming a company vehicle." Brooke folded her arms. "You cannot take someone's car. It belongs to the company." "Mason is the company." Luis looked at her. "No, ma'am, he isn't." Mason stepped closer. "You work for me. I work for Whitaker Millworks. It's called Hearth and Grain. That's the name on the sign." "The keys," Luis said again. Mason took out his phone and called me. I watched it ring from my kitchen. He called 3 times. Then he left a voicemail. "Dad, Luis is standing outside my home trying to steal my vehicle. Call me immediately and fix this." "Not please. Not can we speak. Fix this." Luis waited. Mason refused to surrender the keys. The fleet driver began attaching the Yukon to a tow bar. Brooke pulled out her phone. She started recording. "This is unbelievable," she said loudly. "My father-in-law is having our car stolen because Mason told him the truth at dinner." A neighbor opened her garage. Another person watched through a window. Mason shouted that he would call the police. Luis answered, "They can check the registration." Mason did not call. Some part of him already knew. He threw the keys into the wet driveway. Take it. Luis bent down and picked them up. Tell my father I hope he enjoys his revenge. This isn't revenge. What would you call it? Inventory. The video Brooke recorded ended there. She posted it online expecting sympathy. Instead, viewers began asking why a successful business owner's car was registered to someone else. An employee's wife commented, because the company owns it. Mason only drives it. Brooke deleted the post. Screenshots remained. By 8:30, the Yukon was loaded with tools. Mason stood in the rain watching it leave. His voicemails changed throughout the morning. You had no right. When you calm down, we'll discuss this like adults. You're punishing Brooke for something I said. You're embarrassing the company. Grant thinks you're having a breakdown. Then finally, Dad, what are you doing? I did not answer. Tuesday began with coffee. Mason entered a cafe near the showroom and ordered drinks and breakfast for the design staff. It was part generosity, part performance. The total was $142. His company card was declined. He tried another. Declined. People waited behind him. The cashier lowered her voice. Do you have another payment method? There's a problem with your machine. The man behind Mason paid for his own coffee without trouble. Mason used his personal debit card. It worked. His banking app immediately warned him that his balance had fallen below $500. He arrived at the showroom carrying the drinks, but did not distribute them. His access to the accounting system was gone. His spending authority had been suspended. The staff received a message from Rosa announcing that I had resumed leadership and Luis would oversee operations. At 9, everyone gathered in the conference room. I stood beside Rosa and Luis. Mason entered 6 minutes late. What is this? A staff meeting, I said. This should be discussed privately. We will speak afterward. I faced the employees. Some of you know me. Others joined after I stepped away from daily work. I founded Whitaker Millworks 40 years ago. 5 years ago, Mason helped us create a new brand and expand into full renovations. Mason's shoulders relaxed slightly. He deserves credit for several strong ideas, I continued. But the company has moved away from the values that kept it alive. We spent money on appearance while cutting crew bonuses. We fired experienced employees for raising safety concerns. We discussed expansion while placing the original building at risk. Mason stepped forward. You're making business decisions based on a family argument. I reviewed the numbers. You don't understand the modern company. I understand when sales rise 12% and unnecessary expenses rise 34%. He looked at Rosa. You went behind my back. She did her job. I run the company. Not anymore. The room became completely silent. Mason's face reddened. I am the founder. Number. The word carried farther than I intended. He stared at me. I continued more quietly. You helped rebrand the company. You did not found it. That's a technicality. It is history. I built Hearth and Grain. You were paid to build the brand. He looked at the employees. You all know who brought in the clients. Luis spoke. And you know who completed the work? Mason turned on him. This has nothing to do with you. You cut our bonuses to take your family to a lake resort. That was strategic planning. You posted pictures from a boat. Several employees looked away to hide their reactions. Mason pointed toward me. This is what he does. He plays the quiet victim until everyone feels sorry for him. Luis answered, No, Mason. That was you at the restaurant. The words froze him. Half the staff heard what you said, Luis continued. The other half saw Brooke's post. This is a private family matter. You made it public. Rosa removed a folder from the table. The suspended crew bonuses will be paid Friday. A murmur moved through the room. Mason looked around for support. Nobody offered it. I opened the conference room door. Go home. You're firing me. You're suspended. For how long? That depends on who returns. His face twisted with anger. He knocked a chair aside and walked out. The glass doors shook behind him. My hands trembled after he left. I placed them flat on the table so nobody would notice. I had imagined feeling powerful. Instead, I felt like I had amputated part of myself to save the body. That afternoon, Grant arrived at my house. He rang the bell twice. I opened the door but did not invite him inside. Sam. Grant. I think emotions have gotten out of control. He smiled tightly. Mason was disrespectful. I told him so. You praised him. He had been drinking. You raised your glass. Grant adjusted his jacket. May I come in? Number. The answer startled him. I'm trying to preserve your family. You're trying to preserve your contract. His expression hardened. My services created enormous value. What did you produce? Strategy cannot always be reduced to physical output. I've spent my life reducing plans to physical output. He lowered his voice. This is jealousy. Of what? Elaine found someone more ambitious. Mason found a better mentor. That cannot be easy. For years, such words might have reached me. Now they sounded prepared. You encouraged Mason to borrow against the showroom. I encouraged growth. You encouraged him to risk a building that feeds 27 families. Successful people accept risk. With their own money. His face became still. I continued. You have received more than $400,000 from my company. From Mason's company. Mine. The word landed. Grant glanced past me into the modest living room. For the first time, he seemed to understand that the ordinary old man in the ordinary house knew exactly how dependent he was. You allowed the contract, he said. Yes. Why? Because Mason believed you were helping him. I was afraid objecting would push him farther away. So this is about control. No, it is about the end of control. I don't follow. I am no longer paying people to remain connected to me. Grant's mask slipped. You are going to destroy your son to prove a point. I am protecting the business from him. And my agreement, finished. You cannot terminate it without cause. Failure to provide measurable services is cause. I can sue. I almost gave him the sharp answer he deserved. Instead, I said, do what you believe is wise. He stared at me. You have always been intimidated by men who know how to win. Then winning should be easy without my checks. I closed the door. Wednesday brought the townhouse. I drove there myself. Brooke's patio furniture remained boxed near the garage. Mason opened the door wearing sweatpants and an old college sweatshirt. He looked as though he had not slept. Come to finish the job. I came to discuss the house. Brooke appeared behind him. Her eyes were red. What about it? The townhouse had hardwood floors, a renovated kitchen, and more square footage than my own home. I had purchased it as a rental investment. When Mason complained that housing costs prevented him from saving, I allowed them to move in for $600 a month. They stopped paying after the second year. I never mentioned it. This property belongs to me, I said. Mason laughed bitterly. Of course it does. You may remain if you sign a normal lease and pay market rent beginning next month. How much? $3,100. Brooke stared at me. We cannot afford that. Then you have 30 days to move. She covered her mouth. This is our home. It has been your home because I allowed it. You're evicting your own son. I am ending a gift. Mason stepped toward me. You took my car, my company, and now my house. I reclaimed a business vehicle. I suspended you from a job. And I am asking you to pay for the property where you live. You know we can't. Yes. Brooke began crying. What are we supposed to tell people? Not where would we go? Not how would we manage? What would we tell people? You can tell them you're moving. That's easy for you to say. It is not easy. You're enjoying this. I looked at Mason. Number. Liar. My temper finally moved. You think I enjoy discovering that my son fired a father with 3 children, so his family could take photographs on a boat. The room went silent. Mason's face changed. What are you talking about? Tyler. He was negative. He warned you a deadline was unsafe. He challenged me in front of the crew, and you punished him. I was leading. You were protecting your pride. Brooke wiped her eyes. This has nothing to do with the house. It has everything to do with the house. The vehicle, the office, the title. Every gift taught Mason that comfort would continue no matter how he treated people. Mason pointed toward the door. Get out. I nodded. This remains your home for 30 days. I will respect that. I placed a simple lease offer on the entry table. At the door, Brooke said, this is all because of one drunken sentence. I turned. That sentence opened my eyes. What I saw caused this. I left. That evening, Brooke packed 2 suitcases and went to her sister's house. Mason drove a rental sedan to Elaine and Grant's home. He believed they would take him in. Grant met him at the door. Elaine stood behind him. "I need somewhere to stay," Mason said. Grant's expression remained polite. "For how long? I don't know. We have the guest room," Elaine said. Grant looked at her. "We need to discuss this. He is my son, and our situation is unstable because of his company." Mason stared at him. "My company? The terminated consulting agreement has created complications. You told me you had other clients." "I do." "Then why is my staying here a problem?" "It isn't about space. It's about boundaries." The words sounded especially ugly coming from Grant. Mason looked at Elaine. "Mom," she avoided his eyes. "Maybe a hotel for a few nights would be better." "I don't have money for a hotel." "You have credit cards." Frozen. Grant folded his arms. "You need to speak to your father. You told me not to apologize. That was before you endangered everyone else." Mason's voice rose. "I called him a failure because you spent 5 years telling me he was one. I encouraged you to think independently. You told me he was jealous of us. I never told you to humiliate him publicly." Elaine finally spoke. "Please don't fight." Mason looked at her. "You sat there." "What?" "At dinner. You said everyone agreed with me. I was upset. You told me afterward that Dad would calm down. I thought he would. You always knew he owned the company, didn't you?" Elaine froze. The answer appeared before she spoke. "Mason, you knew. I knew the original business was still legally connected to him. Legally connected. He built it," Grant said impatiently. "That doesn't mean he had to behave vindictively." Mason looked from one to the other. The people he had called winners would not let him sleep in their guest room. He left without another word. He spent that night in the rented sedan outside the townhouse. Brooke had taken the bedroom. He did not want to enter and hear what she thought of him. Thursday morning, Elaine called me. "We need a family dinner." "Number. You cannot refuse to speak to your own family." "I spoke to Mason yesterday. Grant believes there has been a misunderstanding." "There hasn't." Mason is falling apart. "Then he needs truth, not another performance." "Please." I heard something in her voice I had not heard in years. Fear. Not for me. Not even entirely for Mason. Fear that the family story she had built was collapsing. Where I asked. "Our house. 6 o'clock. I'll come under one condition." "What?" "Rosa and Luis attend. This is a family matter. They are part of the truth." Grant objected loudly in the background. Elaine covered the phone. After several seconds, she returned. "Fine." At 6, I arrived at the large suburban house Elaine and Grant could no longer comfortably afford. 3 vehicles were parked outside. Brooke's sister had driven her. Mason stood near the fireplace. He looked exhausted. Brooke sat on the couch with her arms folded. Elaine hovered near the dining table. Grant stood at the head like a chairman preparing to control the meeting. Luis and Rosa entered behind me. Grant frowned. I agreed they could attend. I didn't agree they could participate. Rosa removed her coat. "Then you invited the wrong people." We sat. "Nobody touched the food," Grant began. "This family has suffered because Sam chose retaliation over communication." I looked at him. "You encouraged Mason not to contact me. I encouraged him not to surrender to emotional manipulation." Brooke interrupted. "Can we stop pretending Sam is using company ownership to punish us?" Luis leaned back. "Who is us?" Brooke looked offended. "My husband and me. You didn't work at the company. I supported the brand. You charged patio furniture to it. That furniture was for content." Rosa opened a slim folder. "The furniture was delivered to your private home and never appeared in company content." Brooke's face reddened. "I'm not discussing accounting details. You use the company card," Rosa replied. "That makes it an accounting detail." Grant raised one hand. "This is exactly the problem. We are drowning in minor accusations instead of addressing Sam's disproportionate response." I placed 4 items on the dining table. The original shop key, the photograph of the first 14 employees, a single page listing payments made to Grant, a printed copy of Brooke's post from the restaurant. No binders, no legal presentation, just 4 pieces of truth. "What is this?" Elaine asked. "The story everyone here chose to forget." I held up the key. "This opened the first shop. Mason was an infant when Elaine and I signed the lease. Then the photograph. These people built the reputation that brought customers to Hearth and Grain. Then the payment list. This is what my company paid Grant over 3 years. Mason looked at the total. $414,000. His face lost color. Grant leaned forward. That figure lacks context. What context? Mason asked. Long-term strategic value. Name one other client. Grant stared at him. Excuse me. 1. This meeting is not about interrogating me. You told me you had a full consulting practice. I do. Name one client. Grant looked toward Elaine. She said nothing. Mason's voice broke. You needed my company. Your company benefited from me. My father's company. The words entered the room quietly. It was the first time Mason had said them. Grant's expression hardened. This is what Sam wants. He wants you ashamed of everything you achieved. No, I said. I want him accurate about what he achieved. Brooke pointed at me. You let him believe it was his. Yes. The admission surprised everyone. I continued. I should have been clearer. I thought giving him room would build confidence. I was afraid that correcting him would reopen old wounds. Elaine spoke. What old wounds? I looked at her. The baseball game. The years I worked too much. The divorce. Everything we never repaired. Mason looked at me. You remember the game? Every time I passed that field. His anger flickered. Then Brooke said, this doesn't change the fact that you humiliated him in front of his employees. Rosa looked at her. He ordered employees to stop calling Sam the founder. Mason turned. What? Rosa slid the email across the table. Elaine read it. Her mouth tightened. Brooke looked at Mason. You sent that? It was brand positioning. Luis gave a short, humorless laugh. Erasing the man who built the company is branding. Grant stepped in. The new organization needed distance from an outdated identity. I looked at him. Was that your idea? He did not answer. Mason stared at Grant. You told me clients needed a clean founder story, and they did. You told me Dad's presence confused investors. It did. You told me he was holding me back. He was. The mask had fallen. Grant was no longer pretending to preserve the family. He was defending his influence. Mason stood. You used me. Grant stood too. I elevated you. You needed my checks. I gave you the confidence your father never did. You gave him arrogance, Luis said. Grant turned. Nobody asked you. I've known Mason since he was a child. You are an employee. Luis rose slowly. Yes. An employee who built cabinets while you built invoices. The room went still. Elaine said, everyone sit down. Nobody did. Brooke turned on Mason. You told me you owned the company. I believed I did. You told me the townhouse was part of your equity. I thought, you thought. Her voice rose. I built my entire life around your success. Mason stared at her. Our life. No, your promises. You spent the money too, because you said it was ours. Grant pointed toward me. This is Sam's fault. He constructed an illusion. I felt anger move through me again. This time I did not contain all of it. No, Grant. I created opportunities. You converted them into worship. The sentence came out louder than intended. You found every insecurity in my son and fed it because his admiration paid your mortgage. Grant's face darkened. At least I showed him affection. The blow landed. The baseball game. The late nights. The divorce. He knew exactly where to strike. For 1 second, I wanted to hurt him back. I wanted to describe his debt, his dependence, and the emptiness of his marriage. I opened my mouth. Then I saw Mason watching me. If I became cruel, Grant would win one final lesson. I lowered my voice. You're right about one thing. I failed Mason in ways money could not repair. Mason looked down. But my failure does not make your exploitation honorable. Grant said nothing. Elaine sat slowly. Tears formed in her eyes. I should have stopped the dinner, she said. Everyone looked at her. She continued. I knew what Sam had done for the company. I knew he was still supporting Mason. I said what I said because I wanted Grant to believe I had chosen the better man. Grant stared at her. Elaine, she shook her head. I was angry for years. Sam worked too much. I felt invisible. When Grant came along, I wanted the story to be simple. Sam failed. Grant succeeded. That made leaving feel justified. Her voice broke, so I kept repeating it until Mason believed it too. Mason looked at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. You made me hate him. No, Elaine whispered. But I gave you reasons. Brooke stood. I can't listen to this. She picked up her purse. Before leaving, she looked at Mason. Fix this. What does that mean? Get the house back. Get your position back. I don't care how. Mason's face changed. What if I can't? Brooke stared at him. Then she walked out. The front door slammed. Grant followed toward the hallway. Where are you going? Elaine asked. I am not sitting here while everyone blames me for Sam's manipulation. Mason stepped in front of him. You told me winners never apologize. Grant stopped. You told me power belongs to the person willing to walk away. Yes. Mason moved aside. Then walk. Grant stared at him. For the first time, Mason did not lower his eyes. Grant left. The house became silent. Mason sat. He looked at the original key on the table, then at me. I'm sorry. The words came quickly. Too quickly. I'm sorry about dinner. I'm sorry about the founder email. I'm sorry about all of it. I waited. He continued. So can we stop now? There it was. The apology as transaction. What do you mean? Restore my access. Let us stay in the townhouse. I'll fire Grant. I'll apologize to the staff. Would you apologize if the car job and house had remained? His face tightened. I'm trying. You're bargaining. What else do you want? Nothing. That makes no sense. I don't want an apology purchased with restored comfort. His voice rose. So no matter what I say, you've already decided to punish me. I'm not punishing you. You keep saying that while taking everything. What have I taken that you purchased yourself? He stared at me. His eyes filled with anger. You planned that line. Number. You've been waiting to make me feel small. I spent years making you feel larger than reality. He stood abruptly. You know what? Keep the company. Keep the house. Keep your miserable old truck and your moral superiority. He walked toward the door. Elaine called after him. Mason. He did not stop. I watched him leave. The false apology had failed. That needed to happen. But it still hurt. 3 days later, Mason came to my house. It was nearly 10 at night. He had been drinking. Not enough to stagger, enough to be reckless. I opened the door. What do you want? To understand. Tonight, you humiliated me in front of everyone. You demanded a public discussion. You enjoyed exposing Grant. Number. Stop pretending you're above this. I am not above anything. Then admit you wanted revenge. Part of me did. Not the whole truth, but part. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. When Brooke posted that photograph, I wanted to take everything before sunrise. Mason blinked. When Grant raised his glass, I wanted him to lose his house. You did. Not because I wanted it. Because his income depended on money he did not earn. You always have an answer. No. I have years of answers because I spent years saying nothing. He looked toward the street. I went to Mom's house. I know. They wouldn't let me stay. I'm sorry. Grant said I endangered him. Yes. Brooke won't come home unless I fix this. I'm sorry. Stop saying that. What would you prefer? Help me. The plea sounded genuine, but he still meant financially. I won't restore the old arrangement. Then give me a loan. Number. I'll repay it. Number. You don't believe me. I believe you are frightened. That's not an answer. It is the only honest one I have. His face twisted. I hate you. The words hurt. I did not pretend otherwise. I know. He waited for me to react. I did not. He walked away. I watched until he reached the sidewalk. Then I went into the workshop. The crooked birdhouse sat on the bench. I placed both hands on it and cried for the first time since the restaurant. Not graceful tears, not quiet wisdom. I cried like a father who had spent decades trying to buy back one missed baseball game and finally understood the price had been his son's character. The following week, Mason and Brooke moved from the townhouse. Brooke went to her sister's house. Mason rented a one-bedroom apartment near the airport. The carpet was beige. The balcony faced a parking lot. The kitchen was smaller than the pantry in the townhouse. He applied for executive positions. No one hired him. Several companies were interested until they learned he had not owned Hearth and Grain. Others asked for references from former employees. Those calls did not help. After 3 weeks, his savings were nearly gone. He accepted a job at a regional building supply warehouse, customer service coordinator. He answered contractor calls, corrected shipping mistakes, and loaded boxes when the warehouse was busy. His supervisor was 29. On his first day, a contractor screamed at him because a shipment was late. Mason blamed the driver. His supervisor, a woman named Keisha, stopped him. "He doesn't need excuses," she said. "He needs an honest answer and a solution." The sentence stayed with him. A week later, Mason misentered an order. A crew arrived at a job site without the correct cabinet hardware. The warehouse absorbed the cost. Keisha did not fire him. She made him call the contractor, apologize, and arrange the replacement delivery. Mason spent 3 hours fixing one mistake. That evening, he understood something Luis had tried to teach him for years. A promise made in an office becomes somebody else's exhausted hands. He began arriving early, at first because he feared losing the job, later because his co-workers depended on him. He received his first full paycheck after taxes. It was less than he used to spend on dinner for clients. He paid rent, electricity, car insurance on a used Honda he financed himself. The balance remaining in his account frightened him, but the apartment was still his for another month, because he had paid for it. That felt different. I learned these details slowly, not from Mason, from Rosa, whose cousin worked at the warehouse. I did not seek updates, but I did not stop listening when they arrived. One rainy evening in November, I drove past the warehouse. I told myself it was on the way home. It was not. Through the loading bay opening, I saw Mason carrying boxes with another employee. His jacket was soaked. He looked tired, older. For one reckless moment, I pulled into the parking lot. I reached into the glove compartment for my checkbook. I wrote $20,000. Enough for rent, a reliable car, a fresh start. My hand shook above the signature line. Then I remembered the restaurant, not the insult, the years leading to it. Every rescue had prevented the lesson from becoming real. I tore the check into 4 pieces. Then I sat in the truck, feeling like the worst father in Kentucky. Boundaries do not feel powerful when you love the person on the other side. Sometimes they feel cruel. The difference between cruelty and a boundary is not how much pain it causes. It is whether the pain serves truth or ego. I drove away. At Hearth and Grain, life continued. Luis reorganized production. Rosa restored the crew bonuses. Tyler returned. We converted Mason's executive lounge into a training room. The founder's sign remained in storage. In the lobby, we hung the photograph of the first 14 employees. Beneath it, a simple sentence, built by many hands. I did not put my name on the wall. Legacy is not attention. Grant's life changed more slowly. Without the consulting payment, he could not maintain the lake cabin, 2 leased vehicles, and the large house. There was no dramatic foreclosure the next morning. Real consequences usually arrive as envelopes. Past due notices, returned payments, arguments behind closed doors. Grant sold the lake cabin at a loss. He returned 1 vehicle. The country club membership disappeared. Elaine called me in December. Did you know he had no other major clients? I suspected. You should have warned me. I did. When? The first year you were married. You said you were concerned about mixing family and business. Yes, you should have been clearer. How clear must a former husband be about the new husband's income before it stopped sounding like jealousy? She became quiet. Then she said, "We may lose the house. Sell it." Where would I go? Somewhere you can afford. You have an empty house. Number. I did not ask yet. You were going to. Her voice hardened. You have changed. No. I have stopped volunteering for the same injury. Grant says you planned this because you never stopped loving me. I looked around the kitchen where we had once eaten canned soup. I do not want you back, Elaine. The words were not cruel. They were clean. She began crying. We were married for 24 years and divorced for 12. I am still Mason's mother. Yes, you owe me compassion. I have compassion. Then help. Compassion and financing are not the same. Her crying stopped. You are going to die alone. The sentence found my oldest fear. For a moment, I saw myself aging in the quiet house. No family at Christmas. No one at the hospital. No Mason. Then I remembered how lonely I had been at Ember and Oak, surrounded by people who shared my blood. Being surrounded by people who do not respect you is another way of dying alone. Elaine inhaled sharply. I continued. I hope you find a stable place. I hope Grant becomes honest. But his bills are no longer my problem. I ended the call. My hands shook afterward. I sat at the kitchen table until the trembling stopped. In January, Mason called Rosa to place an order for the warehouse. Neither mentioned their history. He confirmed quantities, corrected a pricing error, and arranged delivery. At the end of the call, Rosa said, "You handled that well." Mason answered, "It's my job." Luis saw him 2 weeks later while collecting materials. Mason was loading hardware into our truck. He walked over. "I owe you an apology." Luis waited. "I treated you like you were replaceable," Mason said. "I was wrong." Luis looked at him. "Yes, you were." Mason nodded. "I know. I accept the apology." Mason appeared relieved. Then he asked, "Is there any chance?" Luis raised one hand. "Don't ruin it." Mason stopped. That was the first apology he gave without receiving anything in return. In March, an envelope arrived at my house. The handwriting on the front belonged to Mason. Inside were 5 pages. "Dad, I started this letter several times. The first versions explained why everything was partly your fault. Maybe some of it was. You worked too much when I was young. You missed things that mattered to me. You used money when I needed conversations. But I used your mistakes as permission to become worse. I told myself I had built hearth and grain because admitting how much you gave me made me feel dependent. Grant made that shame sound like ambition. Mom made it sound like loyalty. Brooke made it look successful online. But I chose it. I sent the founder email. I cut the bonuses. I fired Tyler. I stood in a restaurant and called you a failure because I needed everyone to believe I was greater than the man carrying me. I'm sorry. Not because I want the company back. Not because I want the townhouse. I am writing this from my apartment. The heater rattles. My neighbor's dog has been barking for 40 minutes. I paid rent yesterday. It was the first time I understood exactly how many hours of my life were inside one payment. The apartment is small, but it is mine for another month because I earned the money. I still get angry at you. Then I remember that you could have exposed me years ago and did not. You protected my pride until protecting it became dangerous. I do not know whether I deserve a relationship with you. I hope one day I can become someone you would choose to know even if I were not your son. Mason. I read the letter 3 times. Then I placed it beside the repaired birdhouse. I did not call immediately. Not because I wanted him to suffer. Because his progress needed to belong to him, not to my approval. 3 weeks passed. On a Saturday morning, someone knocked on the workshop door. Mason stood outside. He wore work boots, jeans, and a plain jacket. No expensive watch. He held 2 coffees. I remembered you drink it black. I stepped aside. He entered. The birdhouse sat on the bench. You fixed it. Yes. He touched the crooked roof. You told me it was perfect. I lied. He laughed softly. Then his eyes filled. I'm sorry, Dad. This time he did not add a request. I handed him a piece of sandpaper. The roof still needs work. We spent 3 hours in the workshop. At first we discussed wood, then work, then the baseball game. I waited for you, he said. I know. Mom told me you chose the restaurant. I did. Why? I was afraid losing the client would cost us payroll. You could have told me. I thought being provided for would make the reason obvious. It didn't. I know. I hated that shop. I know. Then Grant told me the shop proved you were afraid to succeed. What do you believe now? Mason ran his hand along the birdhouse roof. I think you built the place that paid for everything I had. That is not the same as being a good father every day. He looked at me. You're admitting that. I always knew it. You never said it. I'm learning. He nodded. So am I. When the birdhouse was finished, he asked, Can I take it? Yes. He held it against his chest. Can we do this again next Saturday? Yes. That was how our relationship returned. Not with a restored title. Not with a check. With 2 men sanding a crooked roof. Brooke and Mason remained separated for nearly a year. She contacted him after learning that he had been promoted to senior customer coordinator. He refused to move back into a lifestyle they could not afford. They attended counseling. Brooke eventually admitted she had loved what their life said about her more than she had loved the life itself. Whether that admission saved the marriage, I cannot say. They rented a modest duplex together the following year. Grant and Elaine divorced. Grant moved to Florida and began advertising online seminars about rebuilding after financial betrayal. Some people never change. They simply rename the story. Elaine moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near her sister. 8 months after the restaurant she invited me for coffee, she apologized without explaining herself. That mattered. We did not become friends, but we stopped carrying the same unfinished argument. Mason spent 14 months at the warehouse. Then he accepted a junior estimator position with a roofing company. He took classes at night. He learned scheduling, pricing, and project management from people who did not care who his father was. 2 years after the dinner, an entry-level project coordinator position opened at Hearth and Grain. Mason asked whether he could apply. I told him applications went through Luis. He submitted a resume. Rosa checked his references. Luis interviewed him. I stayed out of the process. They hired him. His salary was less than half of what he had once earned. His desk stood near the production floor. On his first day, he arrived early and swept sawdust from the entrance. Nobody asked him. He did not receive ownership. He did not ask. 3 years have passed since the dinner at Ember and Oak. I am 72 now. The company is stronger. We never opened the unnecessary showrooms. Instead, we created an apprenticeship program for young adults who cannot afford college. Luis owns a real share of the business. So does Rosa. Longtime employees receive annual profit distributions. Mason owns no shares yet. He understands why. Last month, he completed the largest project he had managed since returning a community kitchen for a local shelter. When the work was finished, the shelter director gathered everyone for a photograph. Mason called the installers forward. He placed Luis in the center. I stood near the edge. The position felt familiar. Then Mason noticed. He walked over, took my arm, and pulled me beside him. This began with my dad, he told the director. Not the project. Everything. The company. The opportunity. The rebuilding. I did not need the recognition. That was why it meant something. Afterward, Mason and I ate lunch at Miller's Diner. No photographer. No wine. No speeches. Cheryl brought coffee and pie. Through the window, my old Ford sat between 2 newer vehicles. Mason looked at it. You know, I used to be embarrassed by that truck. I know. I thought people would see it and believe we weren't successful. What do you think now? He studied it for a moment. Then he smiled. Now I know it's paid for. I laughed. So did he. The answer was simple. That was what made it perfect. My son did not become a better man when I gave him everything. He began becoming one when I finally stopped. For years, I believed love meant preventing him from falling. But a grown man who never carries weight never learns his own strength. A child who receives everything without understanding its cost may eventually mistake generosity for weakness and sacrifice for failure. I did not reclaim my dignity when I took back a vehicle, a job title, or a house. I reclaimed it when I stopped allowing people to use my love as evidence that they could disrespect me without consequence. Mason did not rebuild his life when he returned to the company. He began rebuilding it in a small apartment, holding a paycheck that represented his own exhausted hours. Legacy is not a name on a building. It is not a large house, an expensive vehicle, or the amount of money left in an account. Legacy is the truth your children carry after the gifts are gone. It is whether they understand that dignity cannot be purchased, respect cannot be demanded, and self-worth cannot be borrowed from another person's success. At 69, my son called me a failure. At 72, I no longer need him to call me anything else. I know what I built. I know where I failed. I know what I repaired. And I know that love does not require me to disappear so someone else can feel important. Sometimes the strongest thing a parent can say is not, "I will always rescue you." Sometimes it is, "I love you too much to keep financing the person you are becoming." So tell me honestly, would you have taken the support away as I did? Or would you have given Mason one more chance before forcing him to stand on his own?